Hello, I'm Rotenks of Local TCG. You may know me as a very enthusiastic Eugene player who after 4 sets still can't get enough of that lad. And for today's video, I'm going to be going through an in-depth profile on Eugene through all of set 4, explaining ideas behind decks, and also going through decks. There's going to be quite a lot of decks, such as traditional Eugene, Maiden Eugene, some, maybe a bit of Vairina, and, also Highlander, the thing that I tried to make a thing alongside Kuroneko, 2 months ago. So anyway, let's get into the extreme basics with our ride deck. So your ride deck consists of the 4 grades, 0, 1, 2, and 3. You have your grade 0 starter, doesn't matter who it is, can be anyone. You have your grade 1, who is going to be gunning of the Duststorm Nigel, an extremely good grade 1 for the ride deck because of his only ride deck based ability, where on Vanguard, when he is rode upon, you soul charge 1. So it's a free soul charge, can't go wrong. And then his second ability, which on rearguard, when you retire an opponent's rearguard in the main phase of your turn, you can CB1 and retire this unit, aka himself, and choose another rearguard of your opponent's to retire. A decent skill, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the grade 1s in the next build. And then with this next member, we have, I don't know how to pronounce, I'm going to try my best to pronounce it, but I know I'm going to fail. Cataclysmic Bullet of Duststorm Randall. He has 2 abilities like Nigel. One of them is Vanguard only. When this unit is rode upon by a Eugene, or let me get the full title, Heavy Artillery of Duststorm Eugene. Draw a card and choose a card from your drop zone and add it and put it to your soul. Extremely good ability because you're always going to have a card in drop zone to, put into soul because that's the ride deck cost. Unless we somehow and for some reason get a macro Cosmos or something like that, or just a floodgate rearguard that doesn't allow you to put cards to drop zone. And instead binds or something, but I don't think we'll ever get to that point. And then he also has a second skill where on Vanguard rearguard, when he attacks, if the opponent only has 2 or less rearguards, he can CB1 to soul charge 1 and get 5k power. I wrote a bit of a cringe thing in the script where I say, by attacking a weakened Vanguard with weakened forces. Yeah, that's kind of cringe, but anyway, yeah. He can on attack CB1, soul charge 1 and get 5k, which is a nice ability to have just to apply some early pressure. And I'll also talk about if you use that in builds later on when we get to that. But for now, let's go to the big man himself, Eugene. He has 2 strong Vanguard abilities alongside the staple Persona Ride ability that most grade 3s share. His first ability allows him to rest 2 rearguards of his, or yours, to retire one of your opponent's rearguards and give him 10k for the turn. I'm sorry, I'm a bit sleep, but screw it. So rest 2, retire 1, and get 10k for the turn. Pretty good ability. It just allows you to get retires going for that turn. It gives Eugene a good buff, making him a 23k beat stick, which makes it slightly more annoying to guard because then that's asking for 3 cards to no pass it, including 2 triggers, which is always super nice. So an amazing ability to have for just the 10k buff. And then he has a second ability, which is the big key ability of the man. If you retired an opponent's rearguard during this turn, once per turn, and on Vanguard only, you can Soul Blast 5 to look at the same amount of cards that have been from the top of your deck equal to the opponent's amount of open rearguard circles. So let me repeat this again because I always find it difficult to explain this. But by Soul Blasting 5, you get to check the top amount of cards of your deck equal to the amount of open rearguard circles the opponent has. So for example, if they have 4 open rearguard circles, you check the top 4 cards of your deck. If they have 3, you check the top 3. There we go. I think that's a good way to explain it. But anyway, after you check the top cards of your deck, what do you do with them? Well, you can either call them down to the rearguard or put them into your soul. So it just gives you a good 3+ value engine in the deck. Alongside the retiring, it makes for a good control-based build, which you can do with this deck. And as well, just helps you conserve hand, which is greatly appreciated for any deck. If you're able to conserve hand by, superior calling a unit, you'll go for that option 9 times out of 10 because it's just that much value. And Eugene being able to essentially call an entire board with a nutty top 5 is really nice, but there's always going to be the opposite as well. So you always want to use Eugene's skill with the fact sitting in your mind that, hey, I might get a really shitty top jack, but if that does happen, you're just going to have to play with the best you can with that top jack. But, you know, again, we'll talk about that later on in this video when we get to the actual plays and such. But for now, we'll go to the PGs and triggers and all the generic stuff. So first, we'll begin with, you know, the staple 4 of the triggers. The heals. Good cards and good triggers. And then we have 1 OT as well. You mainly want it to be Drag Vetter because getting that Eugene restand or like any Vanguard restand for this deck is extremely welcome because you're getting a lot more hand, and by a lot more I mean what, 1 or 2 more, which for this deck is a lot when you're not playing the more, you know, draw heavy build, which only draws like 1 more per turn, but still. And it's also just a nice way to get more pressure because when you have the other OT, which is just the 200 million, sure, the 100 million is nice, but that is more prone to miss, and like, you know, for you to not have that extra unit to get the 100 million and benefit from it. Unlike Drag Vetter, he will get you at least 2 more drag checks, which is a bigger chance of checking your crits, which will be able to close out the game. And speaking of which, let's quickly go over the crits. In this lineup that I have on me right now, I'm running 7 crits. However, I do think you can run 7 or 8. You can go low if you want, but I think that it's crucial to maximize your chance of getting the opponent with a crit. But also, when I say maximize, but I mean just get as high as possible. So, you know, 7 or 8, that's pretty high. That is pretty much half your trigger lineup. So you're going to be checking it most of the time when you go for triggers. And about having no effect triggers, well, I think that the effect trigger, while useful, is not something that's mandatory for Eugene himself. It's a good card for, you know, like Bavsagra and Nirvana because they at times needed that soul. But for Eugene, you don't need that soul, and the 2k buff isn't enough of a boost to essentially worry about it too much. If you have it, go ahead and use it. But if you don't worry about getting it. But, you know, it would always be nice to have, you know, sometime in the future. And then next, we'll go on to 3 or 4 slots you will have left after the triggers, which will be your draws or fronts. Come step 4, you do get Flame Veil Dragon, the draw trigger, which is a 10k shield, and it's extremely strong. I don't have mine on me because I don't know where I put them, but anyway, that's besides the point, because in Eugene, I believe that you want to mainly use the 20k front, which is Blaze Maiden per armor, just because I think the 20k shield from the front alongside the 10k power buff to the front row is so much stronger, because Flame Veil, its draw would not always guarantee you a good draw, and it's also just a draw I don't want to rely on. If I want to draw, I want to draw from something within my main deck which I'll be able to reliably see, and not a trigger. Which is why I just think having a front to give more explosive turns through power is always welcome. While with the draw, it will be sometimes when that draw is extremely not welcomed and causes me to deck out or such, as that is a key thing that happens to set for Eugene. So that's also another reason to not run it. However, again, you go with what you want to. And so with this, we can now just go over quickly what the main lineups or triggers will usually lead to. You will have 4 heal, 1 OT, and 7 critical, with 4 fronts or draws, or 4 heal, 1 OT, 8 criticals, and 3 fronts or draws. And again, you can change up these lineups if you want. Go full rainbow, or maybe even just remove crits overall. It's up to you, and if you can find a reason for it, I encourage you to do it. So anyway, let's now head into the main decks. Now we're going to be going to the main decks of all the decks and just going bit by bit. So I do want to, just give a bit of a reminder that when we're going through these, I'll not be jumping around through builds and going like, so you run this card in this build and this card in this build. However, you don't run these cards in the same build. I'll be going through builds one at a time, and if there are cards that are shared between these builds that are not generics, such as the PGs or Personas, I will just quickly mention go back to this time to watch the reasons for why, and here are any changed reasons for why you should add this card into this deck, because it might benefit for a different reason. But with that all out of the way, I do want to also preference one thing. The ride line, you know, this, and Persona rides, this, and your PGs, these will all be staying the same throughout all these builds, similarly to the triggers, which is why I do not want to keep repeating these when it comes to showing these in the decks. So these will all be skipped, and just keep in mind the ride line, Persona rider, PGs, and triggers that I showed are just going to be kept the same throughout all these builds unless I otherwise state it. But without that, we'll now head into the grade 1s. Beginning with this build, we have a more traditional build, which you can see up on the screen now. The deck log code for this is L4NE, or what I called lane, or I first read it as lane, but they're not going to call Eugene lame, are they? But this is the most traditional and normal build of Eugene that you can possibly make. So we'll just go through it. With first 4 strong sharp dragon Guy's Fort. Ignore how I don't have a 4th here. I'm trying to find a foil, but I'm not able to find it. But anyway, here's a new card in set 4, which has just one amazing skill that synergizes with Eugene extremely well, and that is, once per turn, when you retire an opponent's rearguard, restand him and gain 2000 power for that entire turn, once per turn. It's a great ability. It helps you use Eugene's rest skill and not lose out on rearguards as much, meaning you don't need to recommit cards to at least have boosters, and he also becomes a 10k booster, which is extremely great early on against a grade 2 Vanguard, or also just a good booster for a Dustin when you're only retiring 4 rearguards, or even just like a good generic booster for your grade 3 Eugenes that you may call out, or even just other grade 1s. So he's just able to make magic numbers with pretty much all the cards in the deck, which is something that you want, and it's amazing. So thank you, little fella, for doing what you do. And then next we have 4 Twin Strike of Duststorm Orlando. Now this man, amazing man here. He has 2 abilities, one in Soul, which is when your opponent's rearguard is retired this turn, CB1 and call him out to rearguard. Just an amazing skill, because if you use Randall's on ride skill to put him into Soul, or Eugene's Soul +5 and you chuck him into Soul and you want to get him out, you can just call him out like that. There's also other cards like Travis with his random soul charging, Nigel with his random soul charging, and Dustin with his select filtering from hand that can also help you get him into Soul and take him out. And he also has a second skill which also puts himself into Soul, which is on rearguard when your grade 3 or greater Vanguard attacks, you can put him to Soul to choose one of your Vanguards and give it 5k until end of turn. Pretty nice skill. It helps Eugene once again hit those numbers. It's another rest target for Eugene as well, because you're going to rest it, but you're also going to be putting it into Soul, which makes it a lot of a better card. And there's not really much else to say, but it helps Eugene also hit the magic numbers, which, beautiful. Hitting that 28k Eugene is just a really solid number. 38k with Guy's Fort, it's insane. Because you're essentially asking for like 3 cards, including like a front trigger, to make it a 2-pass, or just asking for a PG, which doing that in Eugene is going to be severely welcomed, because your rearguards are also going to be swinging pretty big as well. And usually the Vanguard was the weakest of the lot. Anyway, we'll now head into the grade 2s. We are going to start the grade 2s off with the main addition from set 4, which is going to be 4 Travis Scott Morrison. He has one simple but effective skill, and that is, on rearguard or once per turn, if you retire another rearguard during this turn, you can CB1 to retire another opponent's rearguard, Soul Charger 1, and gain 10k. So this guy does 3 big things for Eugene. He can add on to more retires, and also he has a similar cost to Nigel, by the way, without losing himself on board, which, gives more reason to not run. And he also Soul Charges, which is extremely nice, because you do need Soul for multiple cards in the deck outside of Eugene, and it also helps you build up soul to do another Eugene if you really need to find other pieces. And he also gets 10,000 power, which, I don't know about you, but getting a 20k body for just a single CB and also getting, some more retires, pretty nice. And it's just a really good generic card as well. It helps you in any situation as long as you've used Eugene's skill, so it's also very easy to activate, and he also can be used as a rest token for Eugene, and then use his skill so you at least get 2 retires. So I don't know what to say outside of very nice. Next we have for Dustin, Mr. Dustin Beebs. He has 2 abilities, both are rearguard abilities, and well, here's also a cool fact about his name. Unlike most other units that have the of Dust Storm in their name, a howitzer is not actually a gun. A howitzer is not even a bullet as well. It was a, it's meant to be a cannon that is fired into a large crowd of cavalry or just crowds of people that are riding back in the olden days and just mow people down. So I think that was a kind of cool thing to notice as well, because he's also just firing a single shot with his gun as well. But anyway, let's actually get into his abilities. So as I said just before, he has 2 skills that are both on rearguard. One of them is on place on rearguard. You check if you have a Eugene Vanguard, and if you do, you can put a card from your hand into soul to draw a card and retire a grade 2 or higher rearguard. It's an amazing ability because it serves as a filter, and it's also just an easy, simple on-play skill that requires only a Eugene Vanguard. So you're going to be able to be getting this off very easily, and this can also be the start of your Travises and such like that, other skills that need you to retire. You can just use Dustin instead of Eugene, which is more beneficial at times when you don't have the rearguards you want to rest, so you want to be avoiding resting 2 for no reason, where you can instead just call down a Dustin, get a free filter, and get a retire. However, there is the unfortunate downside of his ability where he can only target grade 2 or higher. So if you're fighting, say, Orphist, or if you misplayed a bit and you retire the grade 2s earlier on that turn, when you call down Dustin, he will serve only as a filter because you won't have the grade 2s or higher to retire, which is unfortunate, but is a respectable balancing decision on their part, because I do think otherwise Dustin would have been an insanely good card just by having the ability to filter and retire anything. And then he also has a second ability where when he attacks, you can Soul Blast 1 and get 2k per other open rearguard on the opponent's side of the field for that battle. So, if you have an entire empty board on the opponent's side, he will be swinging for 20,000 power, which is also the amount Dustin does for a single Soul Blast, which, you can kind of say these also work hand in hand together, which is a nice thing about this list. Every card works together. And also with Dustin's 2k skill for every open rearguard, even on turns where you can retire 1 or 2 rearguards, it's still going to do enough alongside with your boosters to make an impact on the game state and get more shield out of the opponent's hand. Even just getting to the 4 open rearguards to make him become an 18k beatstick is good enough, because that with Guys 4 is already going to be 28. You just need to probably get the extra 5 open if you only have an Orlando to boost him, because then he'll be swinging for that 28, 38, whatever 8, and that is a much more welcomed number. And now we'll also go into the last grade 2 of this deck, and the second last card in this list overall, which is going to be Strong Fortress Dragon Gibrabrakio. He is quite a funny fellow with that neck. But anyway, he has 2 abilities like Dustin. He has an Axe skill, which if you have a Eugene Vanguard, you can Soul Blast 1 and rest him to retire one of your opponent's rearguards. So, pretty good skill. Just like Dustin and Travis, it's a good way to just get more retires throughout the turn, and similar to Dustin, it's a way to get retires going without resting your key rearguards, and, not losing out and having to recall over them. And the soul as well, it gives you another soul outlet to use for the soul you will be gaining from Travis, from riding, and from your Dustin. And he also has a second ability, which we should also go over, which is at the beginning of your battle phase, if your opponent has 1 or less rearguards, You can stand him and get 5k power for the end, until the end of turn. So, you know, at first glance you're like, if they have one or less rear guards, that's kind of ridiculous as a requirement, is it not? No. You get to be able to kill rear guards very easily in this deck. So that one or less requirement, it's pretty irrelevant outside of, you know, that like one fight video we had where against Bavs, I kept forgetting there was 2 trick stars on board and I just restored it outside of habit. So that should just really show how easy it is to just clean up an entire board, because if I'm just habitually restanding the Brachio illegally, I think that just shows how much you can retire in this deck and achieve that condition. And the plus 5k as well is extremely nice. It becomes 15 by itself and becomes a 28k when boosted by a grade 1, 25k by Guy's Fault, but that's a number that's irrelevant outside of, you know, the turn where you go first on grade 3. And it also provides a good rush, because early on grade 2, your opponents are most likely not going to be calling anything out, and if they are, it's going to be Magnolia, not Sorga. It's going to be Magnolia. I didn't write this down. That's a bit dumb by me, but it's going to be Magnolia, Orphist, and Bastion. Those are the 3 decks that are most likely to have a rear guard out, and that's because their Bride Line's main game plan is gonna be to give them a rear guard on their grade 2 turn. And regardless, that's still gonna be just under the limit for Brachio to activate his effect to get 5k and become a 15k beat stick to the Vanguard or to that rear guard they called down, allowing you some pretty good pressure just for, you know, essentially nothing. But anyway, that is all for the grade 2s, and we'll now head into the grade 3s. There is only one grade 3 you run in this traditional Eugene list, and that is Best Harvest. This is an amazing order that was released and set free alongside other cards such as Dustin or Orlando, and it has one simple but extremely good effect for Eugene. It is choose one of your opponent's Vanguards, and until the end of the turn, it gets auto Vanguard Circle. When your opponent's rear guard is retired during your main phase, draw a card. This allows you to use all your retire cards to essentially just get trades. You're going to be going one card down in hand to draw one card when you retire. Your Dustin is going to be drawing 2 for his ability instead of 1, making it, you know, a neutral still. Your Brachio is going to be getting placed down, and you're just going to draw a card. You can also play a bit risky with this alongside Eugene's Soul Blast 5 and bank on getting retires from the Soul Blast 5 to try and add more plus and try and go +1 or +2 during that entire exchange. However, there's also one thing to notice, that you will never be able to trade for a commitment of a card in hand and Best Harvest at once. You'll need to have a card that is already on field to retire with to get that card back from Best Harvest. But it's still an amazing card, because I'm able to commit 5 cards from hand and still have 5 cards in hand at the end of that turn. Well, at the end of the main phase, actually, if I had a Best Harvest and all 5 cards were retire cards. But, you know, I think I'm talking too much about just the retire, because there's not really much to talk about there. But this is the traditional build for Eugene, and again, it is up on screen now. The deck log code is L4NE. Now we'll be going into a quick build segment where I show you a bit of changes you can make, such as adding a Tri-Bash, grade 4 Vairina, mixing around some ratios, and we'll go into that now. Before we go on to the second build of Eugene, we have a quick change of variant. The deck code for this list is 557Q, and this just has an alter number of 3 Gibber Brachio, Dustin, and Orlando for 3 added Vairina Esper ideas. So nothing much changes outside of having a more high rolly target to use for your Eugene top deck skill. If you do manage to get him off the top deck, you manage to get a really good restanding rear guard. That's 13, but outside of Persona Right turns at 13, but in Persona Right turns 23k. And you can also serve, you know, if you draw him in hand as a ride target to increase the chance of checking an OT, which if at that point you ride it, will probably win you the game. Now for the proper second build, we have Eugene Vairina, Eugenia, Vairine, whatever. The deck code for this is going to be 64R2.
there's not much to talk about this, so we'll just do a quick speed round of this. So first you have Trickstar, who is a good generic card for Eugene at 4. It has resist alongside, just with OverDress as a mechanic, you're able to do something where you can rest this for Eugene's skill, and then after you rest this for Eugene's skill, you are able to then OverDress on top of anything, and it will go back to stand, because it is still counted as a new call or new unit. That way you have another rest hug for Eugene, which invalidates itself. And then seeing the card I put down was 4 arcs. Just good generic grade 2 OverDress card. Just draws you 2. It helps you get some of the draws back that you lose from your capture festival, meaning that's just amazing. And if you manage to top deck some Trickstars, you can then go into Vairina arcs and just go +1 instead of a neutral, which is always good. Next we'll go into the grade 3s. So the new grade 3s added in this deck are just 3 Valiente and then 2 of another card, but first the Valientes. They're a good rear guard with pressure with the on hit. If you just throw over a Trickstar, it's 18, which isn't the best number now thanks to draw triggers, but hitting a 23k number is always nice because you invalidate the draw triggers if you get 2 underneath it, and that means that you can also place your arcs for a better rear guard, which is always welcomed. And also just the stacking on top means you can get some good numbers going on. Next we have 2 Expector. Let me just move the Vairinas out of the way. Expect because you don't mind missing it, you don't mind getting it. It's an odd finisher to have in the deck, so if you do get it, you're probably not even using it for the finish, but for the extra power. And also as a way to just stack more OverDresses for Valiente as well, because they can both do that with each other. And then also, we have 3 SRODs as the same reason for the last list. If you want more about that list, just watch the other list again to understand why we run SRODR and other cards in this list.
Now heading into our third deck, we are going to be talking about my favorite and what I believe to be the strongest Eugene build, and that is Blaze Maiden Eugene. The deck log code for this deck is Q72G. You will be able to see what the deck looks like here, and also throughout the thing. So there's not much to talk about here. We have the Eugene staples like, the ride line, and then the Persona ride. But however, we do have some adjusted ratios like 2 Best Harvest. We still keep 4 Dustin. We go down to 3 Travis, and we go to 4 Brachio. So, we still have the usual staple stuff. We have the triggers and the PGs, of course. There's a slight thing I want to preface with this deck though. You want to be maximizing on the Blaze Maiden trigger specifically in this deck. So if you're playing the front, you need to be playing Parama. If you're playing heals, you need to be playing Vairina. And if you're playing crits, you need to try and have as many sons as possible. This is so you're able to see as many Blaze Maidens as you can. And especially with Son, even if you have the effect crit, I think it's a lot better if you have 4 Son and 3 effect crit instead of a 4 effect crit and 3 Son if you're going with the 7 crit 4 front ratio. But outside of that, we can actually go into the cards now. So we'll begin with the first card, which is the newest card released for Blaze Maidens as support and is a promo pack for us in set 4. And that is 4 Blaze Maiden Alba. So with Alba, it's an amazing card that you really want to see in the deck, which is why it's at 4. And her effect is, once per turn on rear guard, you can CB1 and rest 3 Blaze Maidens with different names, and draw a card, and then give your Vanguard the ability of, on Vanguard, all your front row units get 10,000 power for the turn. So this is essentially giving your Vanguard another Persona ride, at the cost of usually your back row, which in my opinion is completely fine. I'm okay with that. And as well, it's essentially another way you can figure about it as well is having 3 Guy's Forts in the back row, which is as well super good. And you also get a lot of hand. You're able to, over the course of an entire game, get a lot of failure over the skill. And her failure gets so much better when you consider how Magnolia with Ampex has such a rise in set 4, because the grade 4 is insanely powerful. And just getting that 10k boost when you're not able to, well, retire your opponent's units to get the effects of Travis or Dustin that much is immensely helpful. So you're able to play a vanilla Eugene game with Blaze Maidens and still get some power and hopefully be able to kill with said pressure. However, we'll go on to the next cards. We have 2 more cards to go over. So first, we want free Tanya. I've talked a lot about Tanya in set 2 and set 3. She's an amazing card since release. She has 2 effects. One is on place on rearguard, CB1, choose a grade 0 from your drop zone and call it to rearguard. And the second is when she attacks, Soul Blast 1, choose one of your grade 0 units and get 5k power. Now in set 2 and 3, you will use it for the whole call a trigger and get some value out of that trigger. However, in set 4, she's more, a way to get value off your discards. For example, if you discard a Son or a Rona, and, well, you have Tanya, you're able to call down Tanya, call that Son or Reno, and bam, you already have the 2 other Blaze Maidens to rest alongside with Alba. So it becomes a lot more valuable there. However, you do need to keep in mind that this deck will take a while to kill, and you want to be using Alba as much as possible, so you don't want to be using your CB for stuff like Tanya or Randall. And that means that maybe you'll be using Tanya maybe once or twice over a few games. But that's fine because, well, of course, you have Eugene's Soul Blast 5 skill, so you're not really losing much out of if you're able to get that off. But outside of that, she's still a good card. You're able to call her down and get a free trigger so you can get a Eugene rest target if you're missing Alba anyway. So there's still much value to get from that. And then next we have the last card, which is free Blaze Maiden Reno. Was I saying Reno for the Hiel? What's the Hiel's name? Rona. Alright, I think I might have said Reno a few times before I said Rona in the last bit. But anyway, for the last card we run free Blaze Maiden Reno. Now, we aren't using her to find Trickstar, unfortunately, because she's not on the right deck. However, we can use her for a good early rush on Grade 1 and Grade 2 against said Grade 1 and Grade 2 Vanguards. And then we're able to put her into the back row so Alba can start using her to rest. So it's an amazing card for Eugene's early game, which he always loves to commit down a bit of cards early, and also able to transition very well into late game thanks to Alba. So there's not really much else to talk about with Eugene in its decks. There's of course Highlander, and maybe, some ways on how to play it. But I think a fun thing about a deck like Eugene is being able to discover how you play it yourself and just learning through your own ways, because to me, I find it difficult to teach how to play Eugene because I feel like it's a deck that's very unique to the player. But if you want to see, well, the 4th and other build, which is Highlander, you're not getting it because I'm going to be honest, I didn't really build a Highlander build at set 4. I found it to be a fun joke during set 3, but getting set 4, I think it's just still a ridiculous idea, and maybe if we can see a small community format where we get Highlander decks together, I think I would consider making that into a video, because I think it would be fun to have a small format where it's just all Highlander decks. Of course with some rules like PGs and such. But this is all for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next one. Bye.